Hello, everyone. Today is our final day of the Seven Mighty Moves Book Club. We're very excited to have Dr. Dale Webster with us today, of course, Nancy Eberhardt, and myself, Cheryl Ferlito from Sortagories. And we're excited to share with you the last two moves, kind of the culminating chapters of this book.
Great.
Click here. There we go.
There we go. Our agenda today, well, move 6 is meaningful fluency practice. Move 7 is comprehension by developing vocabulary and background knowledge. So we'll be talking about those two moves. We'll also talk about how Sortagories practices vocabulary, grammar, and phrasing to develop fluency. And question and answer time will come really at any time that you like, and we'll intersperse them as well. So without further ado, Dale, do you want to introduce yourself? I know you don't need much introduction, but you might be new for some folks from CORE.
I'm sure. Welcome, everybody. I'm really glad to be here with you today, and really happy that my buds, Nancy and Cheryl, invited me to be part of this group that you all are part of. I was just thinking about this, Nancy. You and I have known each other, I think, for like 17 years. That's pretty crazy.
Or easily. And I was like 7 years old when I met you. And
yeah, exactly.
Anyway, all kidding aside, it's been a wonderful, however long it's been.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm Dale Webster. I'm the Vice President of Literacy at Core Learning. Core Learning is a company that provides professional learning in literacy and math, and we are a subsidiary now of Unbound Ed. So you may have heard of Unbound Ed before. And Core, if you know anything about Core, you might know the Teaching Reading Source Book, and I have a couple screenshots of the book in certain selected slides, so you might make the connection to that as well. But I've been in this work of helping teachers understand the science of reading for wow, over 2 decades, since 1998, and very excited to continue to be part of that, and really excited that we have this time that we're in now where it's becoming pretty commonplace. A lot of people are learning about the science of reading and excited about it. So I'm excited to continue that conversation with you all today. So I think what I'm going to do, if you've attended the last sessions, I am going to follow Pam Kastner, who's also a good friend of mine, her golden lines. And how I'm going to structure this is that I'm going to take a sentence or two from Lindsay's amazing book, and just kind of talk from that, and then have some follow-up slides to support kind of the big idea behind that. And I do want to give props to Lindsay for writing this book and helping to digest the incredible wealth of information that's out there about how to teach reading. I think she's done that's an understatement, a superb job of trying to distill some things that you can do quickly and relatively easily in your important work of teaching kids. So the first thing we'll talk about is fluency. That's move 6, provide meaningful fluency practice. And the quote I liked about this is that fluency is sometimes defined as reading fast, and considering that we often measure it by timing students' oral reading, go figure, right? And so there's been historically a lot of people like faster, faster, faster. And that's, if you get the higher score, words correct per minute, then you're better, right? But that isn't really true. We know that there's really a lot more to reading fluency. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about that. So the first thing to really make sure, and Lindsay talks about this, is that there's some basic elements of fluency, and it is more complex than just these 3 elements that she points out. But understanding the basics of fluency is important, that there's accuracy, the ability to recognize or decode the words correctly is very important. And if kids are not accurate in their decoding, telling them to read faster is not going to do it, right? And just having them do more reading practice without any instruction isn't going to necessarily help their accuracy either. We have to really teach them, and I'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. Rate is how quickly and accurately a reader reads connected text. And I think the really key factor here is that the number of words that students can automatically recognize impacts their rate. If they recognize a large number of words automatically, their rate is going to be faster, as opposed to if they don't recognize a lot of words and they're decoding a lot of them, their fluency rate is going to be a lot slower, and they're not going to comprehend as easily. And then prosody, for some people, that's a new term. It's really the rhythmic and tonal aspects of speech and raising your voice, the pitch of your voice when you ask a question. And that really indicates a level of comprehension when a reader is reading something and they're reading with that kind of prosody, and they're not just reading like a robot word for word, right? Or slowly. So those are the basic elements of that. And so that's okay. You can go on. The next slide is really the next golden line. And this is really where I want to spend some time, is that when we address the foundational skills of reading, fluency evolves from there. And I have these sound spelling cards. I don't know how many of you are teaching with curriculum that have sound spelling cards, but I encourage the use of those. They're fairly ubiquitous in a lot of reading programs that are out there, but they're not part of all of them. So next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about the phonics lesson sequence. In previous sessions, you've, in Lindsay's book, she outlines on page 50 a phonics lesson plan. And this phonics lesson sequence that's on page 175 of our teaching course, teaching reading source book, lays out a very similar plan. It's not identical, but it has the same main elements. And I want to talk through each one of these for a few minutes, and certainly engage in some questions and answers that you might have. So the first one is the developing phonemic awareness. And if you think about, there's different types of phonemic awareness activities, but it's nice warm up, if you will, when before you're introducing a sound spelling correspondence, to have kids listen. If you're teaching the short A sound, you can have kids listen for and identify the short A sound in words that you say orally. So like in the word cat, do you hear the A sound? Thumbs up. Or then you can say dog, do you hear the A sound? Thumbs down. All different types of responses that you can give kids, have kids give, can help them think about the target sound that you're about to teach, right? And the sound spelling that you're going to be teaching. And then the second step is introducing the sound spelling. And this is where we teach a phonic element explicitly in isolation. And this is where the sound spelling cards come into play really easily. Nancy, if you could go back just that one slide so I can talk about the sound spelling cards you see here. So in the case of either one of these cards, you see multiple spellings for the sound. So the seal card makes the S sound, and it's spelled S-C-E or C-I blank. And the sound spelling cards can give a lot of good information and help kids remember the sound spelling correspondence that they're working with. And you wouldn't teach these all at the same time. You would introduce one sound spelling correspondence at a time. In the case of this card with the seal card, you might cover the CE and the CI with Post-it note until you get to that part in your scope and sequence, which would be a little later down the line. So we're teaching the S sound, and we're helping kids understand that this is the seal card, the sound it makes is S, and the spelling is S. So we think about the name of the card, the sound it makes, and the spelling that's it to spell that particular sound. And so again, when you're thinking about long vowels, again, you're not going to teach all of the sound spelling correspondences you see on that card. Likely your curriculum will guide you in where you're going to, which sound spellings you're going to focus on. And you would cover up the other sound spellings with a Post-it until you've taught those particular sound spellings. Okay, next slide, back to the phonics lesson sequence. So the next step after you introduce the sound spelling correspondence is that you're going to blend words. And in Lindsay's book, she talks about a routine for reading words. But one of the things I'm going to say about that is certainly it's an excellent piece in that chapter. But one of the things that I think is important to understand is that we want to teach kids how to sound out words, so that when they get to words that they don't know, they know what to do. They know how to attack the word. So blending includes explicit instruction and practice in sounding out and reading words. And there are different levels or routines of blending, some that are more scaffolded than others. So sound by sound blending, continuous blending, spelling focused blending, and whole word blending are different types of blending routines that you can do. And when you're first introducing a sound spelling correspondence, the most scaffolded form of blending instruction you would use is either the sound by sound or continuous blending. Our teacher reading source book highlights the details of how what each of those 4 routines looks like. And it's, again, this teacher reading source book is just a great addition to your library of resources. It has a lot of information about how to teach reading, the what it is, why it's important, when to teach it, and how to teach it. Each chapter is set up in that what, when, what, why, when, how format. The next step of the phonics lesson sequence is building automatic word recognition. So after you've blended several words, and this is going to be anywhere, depending on the curriculum, you might have anywhere from 10 to 20 words that you've practiced blending with that target sound spelling, and also review of words with previously taught sound spelling correspondences. So then what you want to do is give them some opportunities to reread those words in different ways. I've seen with just reading the line of words that they've done, or a teacher gives a definition or a scenario, and kids have to then go up and erase the word from the blending lines. So there's lots of different kinds of activities you can do with building automatic word recognition, and our source book gives examples of that. Applying to decodable text is another step in this process, a very important one. I know you spent a long time. I won't belabor the point about decodable text, except to say that this is a very important application piece for this whole routine. One of the things that we were talking about before with Cheryl and Nancy and I, we were talking about this idea that in balanced literacy and guided reading, the centerpiece of the lesson is the book, right? And from the book, you're teaching the skills from that, kind of in context of the reading. However, this is a different approach. It flips it, where the sound spelling correspondence is the centerpiece of instruction. And then you're taking it from there to read words, teaching kids how to sound out words, rereading them, applying it in decodable text so that you're practicing the sound spelling correspondence that you just taught them, but also you're reviewing in a constant manner all the time previously taught sound spelling correspondence that you've taught. And then the last step is word work for decoding and encoding. And in Lindsay's lesson plan, it lists dictation specifically, and you'll see here that that's the last one on the list here. So it's a variety of different activities that you can do, but dictation is absolutely a really important skill to do and teach kids, because you're going to cement the sound spellings. And the final thing I'll say about this phonics lesson sequence is that all of this together, when you're doing this every single day with each sound spelling that you're teaching fluency. You're doing this, you're teaching phonics in a very thorough way, so that kids are really getting multiple opportunities for practice with the phonic element that they're learning, or the sound spelling correspondence. Okay, enough said about phonics lesson sequence.
Great.
So the next golden line is that this idea of one of the best ways to increase your fluency is to engage them in repeated oral reading. And what I loved was this idea that, and I had not read this article before by Lee and Yoon, that they found most effective for students is to pair the reading passage 4 times with the teacher listening the teacher previewing the text, reading it aloud. Okay, and that's for fluency practice. Here's the thing I want to say about that. Go back to the phonics lesson sequence, 1 slide, just real quick for me. The decodable reading practice has to be done by the students. Some people think that the teacher should read the decodable text first so that students can understand it or get the gist of it and then read it. That's exactly not what to do. You want kids to actually try their hand at decoding the words, because this is practicing what you've already been practicing with them and guiding them along. This is still considered guided practice because you're there with the students reading the decodable text, but you want them to try it out the first time themselves, and then like do a whisper read the first round, and then you can do a choral read for that page of the decodable. So the kids are doing the work, not the teacher, because the whole idea is to give them the practice. But for fluency practice, this is a different time. This is a good strategy. Have the teacher model it so they can hear the prosody, and then students read the passage 4 times. Okay, next slide. So they talked about, or Linsday talks about 3 ways: echo reading, choral reading, and partner reading. And what I'll just say quickly about choral reading is that it doesn't have to be the entire class choral reading all the time. It can be small groups. It could be girls with shorts on. It could be boys with wearing green, or anybody wearing green. It can be a multitude. You can get really creative to have smaller groups within the whole group read a page or 2 of something that you're doing. So you can vary up the practice and the opportunities for kids to stay engaged with the choral reading. And I really appreciated her outline of partner reading for how to set that up, how to set up partners, and then also thinking through just how to structure that and how to give feedback to kids who are struggling with words. That's on page 121. So definitely use those charts to help you. So golden line 4, I'll let you just read that. So again, it's going back to that phonics lesson sequence and thinking about, where are my students struggling? Are they struggling with the sound spelling? You can go to the next slide. Are they struggling with phonemic awareness? Are they not able to orally blend or segment the sounds in words, right? Or are they struggling with the actual sound spelling correspondence? The IGH spelling for the long I sound. Is that something that they just haven't quite mastered yet? Do they not have automaticity at the letter sound, or word level? Those are things that you have to think about. If kids are struggling with fluency, where is the bottleneck occurring, so to speak? And the last thing I'd say is have they had enough practice opportunities through something like a phonics lesson sequence of the phonics lesson plan? Was someone going to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to just make a connection. You said if they're not fluent, and I'm assuming you're meaning if their rate isn't very good, this is what you have to do.
Yes.
The measure of the rate is a clue that these other things may need attention. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yes. Yeah,
absolutely.
And thank you for clarifying that, but it gets at this 3rd bullet here: automaticity at the letter sound or word level, because that's what I think there was a mention one of the last sessions that kids need about 4, typically developing readers need about 4 exposures to a word before it becomes automatic. And here's the caveat I would say. It's really, the research is clear that it's for 2nd graders and above who have had some modicum of phonics skills under their belt. It's not going to be a 1st grader learning this for the first time, or even a kindergartner. They're going to need more exposures than 4. But generally, the research just shows that typically developing readers after 2nd grade can usually automatize a word after 2, 3, 4 exposures to the word. And I just quickly show this piece here from our teaching reading source book that shows that how you can just practice doing some letter naming automaticity work. There's a little guidance here for how to actually do the lesson, but having this opportunity not only to have word level or passage reading fluency practice, but also practice with letter naming in early kindergarten, and then letter sound fluency practice in a little later kindergarten and 1st grade, so that they can start to automatize those pieces early on. All right, next slide. So those were there were 4 golden lines or 4 things that I wanted to point out to everybody. What I wanted to do is just take a couple of minutes to have you think about which strategy for success in the book, which is listed on pages 117 through 126, would you definitely start incorporating or have incorporated into your practice already? And why this particular one, and what about that one particular strategy that you started using or going to use? What resonated with you about that? Why did that raise to the level of importance for you? You can either list your answers in the chat, or you can just come off mute and share. We'd love that. Either way. And don't be shy.
I think, Dale, the importance of small group instruction with feedback. Sometimes I can tell you that we're finding that that was skipped. Like the small group was skipped. They were more going from whole group to maybe MTSS intervention, but the small group in the classroom wasn't necessarily happening.
So that differentiated tier 1 in small group instruction is a very important piece. And I think people think about whole group instruction being tier 1, and then small group instruction is tier 2 or tier 3. And that really, we need to think about tier 2 and 3 as intervention. And the small group differentiated instruction as part of tier 1 is really just additional opportunities for practice for kids who might just be on the cusp and not quite getting it.
All right. We're getting some feedback in the chat.
Not yet. Feel free to unmic your if you just want to.
If you don't want to write it out. Yeah.
Or maybe we can ask this question again later.
Yeah, nothing yet, Nancy. I would go ahead then.
Okay. Well,
oh, we got one. Sorry. Partner reading is the one I would like to try. That was my next one I was going to bring up, but I didn't want to steal the show. Yeah. Partner reading. That's really important to get more practice, right?
Yeah, and that's a great way to do some rereading of decodables. Again, I'm going to bring us back to the decodables, because after you've read for some time and gone through the scope and sequence, the kids are going to have a library of decodable texts that they can go back to and reread. And they certainly can reread other books as well. But the decodables are a developing library of books, and kids love to reread books. So I highly encourage the partner reading, going back and rereading the decodables. Someone just noted how they liked how Linsday outlined the steps for assigning partners, because that can be tricky sometimes. And she outlines a very good, nice, systematic way of doing it. And then also what I really like about what she provides is a little chart for how to teach kids how to provide feedback. If a kid comes across a word he or she doesn't know, then they're actually able to provide some feedback, give them, there's a count of 4 seconds, I believe. If they can't get it, then they tell them the word.
And that really, I think, puts a lot of emphasis on both of the people have a job to be doing. So they're not just passively sitting there listening. So I love the kind of forced, in quotes, engagement that's nurtured by that process she outlined. So anyway,
she does a nice job of teaching the rules of that routine. Like otherwise I hear some teachers say, well, the partner reading isn't really going very well. Well, how are the partners assigned? How are the rules set out so they understand the routine? Do they know their jobs? So all of that falls into that classroom management piece of partner reading. She did a nice job sharing that.
Definitely study that part if you're going to implement partner reading.
For sure.
Okay, now let's move on.
There's another one that talks about choral reading with poems for students. That's a great way to develop fluency, and it's fun. They like to do it.
Oh, okay. So one of my favorite quotes from the move number 6 was this one by Melissa Orkin. It's from the same Reading League Journal article that talks about multi-component instruction being the path to fluency. And the reason I guess I like that, and Cheryl likes it, is that that really is the foundation of our word knowledge network wheel. Because if we only focus on particular parts of the wheel, or parts of the layers, if you will, we're not going to get to fluency. I too was captivated by the connection to the lesson plan again that Dale was just talking about. This is the one from Lindsay's book on page 50. And I really thought, fluency is the product of practice. And that reminded me, I think we may have mentioned that the next issue of Prospectus from the International Dyslexia Association is going to be all about practice. And Jamie Peevler wrote an article for that issue in which she took this lesson format, this crazy little poltergeist in my PowerPoint. This lesson, these components are actually different types of practice. And if you start to look at those different steps in the lesson as a different kind of practice, that adds an importance for why you don't want to skip a step and how each step is contributing to fluency. So I just thought that was a wonderful connection. When students retrieve sound correspondence automatically, they can focus on meaning. And that certainly is one of the points that Cheryl and I had in designing sortagories, which is that first row of activities is to work on this automatic word recognition, decoding aspect. And then once you have that, then we can go on to do additional things with those words. And unlike accuracy and rate, prosody is more difficult to measure because it's more subjective. And I had never seen this particular checklist mentioned. And of the 8 items in the checklist for measuring or evaluating prosody is to pay attention to phrases. And I again, you like to read what supports what you're doing, but I think flipping that around, for us, it's been, how do we teach kids to look for phrase boundaries? What is it that makes a phrase a phrase? How do we know how to group words together so that we begin to help kids internalize what that process is? So for that reason, we have built into sortagories a number of activities that work at that, and we'll be coming back to that in a moment. But now we're back to Dale with his golden lines. Dale?
Sorry, I muted myself. I was writing a response to Carrie about the source book, but I'll just say it. So Carrie, if you're still with us, I'm talking about the 3rd edition of the source book. You have the 1st edition, and there is a lot of similarity between the 2 editions, with the exception of the spelling chapters in the 1st edition are not in the 3rd edition, nor is the chapter on wide reading. We don't have a crosswalk of differences, but you may benefit from getting the new edition because of there's definitely some changes and updates in the information and research citations, but also there's a great chapter at the end now on MTSS. So the next section is on vocabulary and background knowledge. And I'm sorry to do this, Nancy, but can you skip ahead to slide 25 that shows Scarborough's rope? I was going to talk about it at the end, but I decided I'm going to talk about it at the beginning. Right there. Thank you. So what I love about Lindsay's book is she really holds up background knowledge and vocabulary knowledge as really, I mean, everything's important, right? But very important are these two. And what I'll say is that background knowledge and vocabulary knowledge are really inextricably linked. That when you develop background knowledge, you are gaining vocabulary. And when you're learning vocabulary, you're creating networks of knowledge that tie into background knowledge. So it's a very reciprocal process of developing these two types of knowledge. And those two then feed into verbal reasoning, especially for inferencing. If you're making inferences about text, about the information that's not there, you're pulling from your background knowledge, right? And so all three of these, verbal reasoning, vocabulary knowledge, and background knowledge, are all kind of intertwined with one another. They are certainly pulled out as separate strands, but and this is what I think is a major reason why Linsday pulled out background knowledge and vocabulary knowledge as the kind of two things to focus on, because you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck, so to speak, by doing that. Okay, Nancy, you can go back to that first slide with the golden line right there. So in terms of, in the book on page 131, Linsday starts out with this whole idea of background knowledge and developing background knowledge through read alouds. And so she's referencing the different types of read alouds, that providing a rich mix of powerful books engages students and prepares students to tackle complex texts themselves. And that's really important, because when you're a kindergartner and first grade learning how to decode and you're reading simple text like decodable text, you're not able to read complex text yourself, right? Because you don't have the ability, the decoding skills to just pull out all the words. So, but your oral language capacity, most of the time, with the exception of maybe English learners and some students with disabilities, have a rich oral language background already that they're bringing to school. And so they can understand higher level text. So you want to read text that's at least 2 grades, if not 3 grades level higher than what their grade level is. And then you're going to be introducing them to high-level vocabulary, academic vocabulary, complex sentence structures that are akin to academic language that kids will be experiencing later. And so all of those high-level vocabulary words, the complex sentence structures, are part of complex text. And so we're exposing them early on, right from the very beginning, in parallel to our decoding instruction. You have to think about a comprehension and decoding, 2 different strands, a decoding strand and a comprehension strand in kindergarten and first grade, because what they can understand is much more than what they can actually read on the page themselves. And so as you're reading aloud to kids, having rich conversations about those books expands their oral language, the vocabulary, and thinking skills. And I highlighted or bolded oral language because that is a key factor in kids' continual development in reading, right? Reading rests on language. So if kids have very limited oral language, reading is going to be more difficult. And phonemic awareness is part of oral language development, but so is syntax, so is understanding and vocabulary. So it's all linked together. So that's all I'd say about the golden line 1, and go to the next slide. So what is vocabulary? And this is to my point that I made earlier, that background knowledge and vocabulary are inextricably linked. That vocabulary knowledge is knowledge, that it not only implies a definition, but it implies how that word fits into the world. And that's a quote by Steve Stahl, great vocabulary research from way back in 2005, almost 20 years ago. So we've known for a long time about the importance of vocabulary and how highly correlated it is to comprehension. In fact, some argue that you can give vocabulary tests to measure a student's comprehension.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go into more detail than that, but there's such a high correlation between comprehension assessments and vocabulary assessments. That's where they get that from. So when we think about vocabulary instruction, we can think about it in kind of 2 ways. We can think about incidental vocabulary learning that's coming out on the left-hand side of this chart through rich oral language experiences, teachers talking and kids talking to one another. Wide reading that's going to occur from the earliest days when kids can start reading on their own all the way through their lifespan. Teachers reading aloud, where maybe the focus isn't necessarily on vocabulary for this particular read aloud, because that's where the incidental comes in. Kids are going to pick up new vocabulary words hearing the context of the story, but you can also teach vocabulary through read alouds in a very intentional way. So I'm moving now over into the intentional side, where we have specific word instruction and we have word learning strategies. And in Lindsay's book, she talks about specific word instruction, mostly in terms of thinking about a routine for teaching words in text. But there's also some other aspects as kids get older and they start learning the meanings of prefixes and suffixes and Greek and Latin roots, that you can do this morphemic analysis where each one of those suffixes and prefixes is a unit of meaning. The prefix pre, for example, means something, right? So you can teach kids the meanings of those morphemes, those units of meaning, and then help them think about when you see a larger word that has prefixes and suffixes and say a Latin root, you can help them kind of analyze the word using the meanings that they know for those morphemes and figure out the meaning of the larger word themselves. So that's the strategy, this idea of morphemic analysis. And then underpinning all of that is this idea of word consciousness and doing some playing around with words and helping, thanks Nancy for highlighting that. And helping kids understand where words come from and their origins. That helps them kind of tune into words and get them excited about words, so that they'll look at a lifelong experience of vocabulary is really important, and learning new words is interesting and fun. So I'm going to just spend a minute talking about the features of effective vocabulary instruction, which goes to that specific word instruction piece. So the first step is really providing a student-friendly definition. We don't want to use dictionary definitions for kids when we're teaching them the meanings of words. And we want to focus, and she points out on tier 2 words, those kind of general academic vocabulary words that kind of cross over different domains of content, and also are frequently found in academic texts. So we want to focus our attention on tier 2 words, and we want to provide multiple encounters with words in those multiple contexts. And I'm going to show you some examples here in just a minute of what that looks like. And then opportunities for students to interact with the word, to deepen the knowledge of the word, the uses of the word, and connections that word has to other words. And Margaret McCown in her paper talks about the research is clear that, and we've known this again since probably the late 80s, that about 12 encounters with the meaning of the word helps to increase comprehension. So again, it's practice using the words in the context of our reading and writing and discussions that we're having in class. The next slide I wanted to highlight because I thought this is really great. And these are something that I hadn't known about, but she has a QR code on page 136 with these text talk lessons created by the Utah Reading First educators back in quite a number of years ago. And I just have an example. The text talk lessons are more comprehension, read aloud type lessons, but part of that is teaching a direct vocabulary, teaching words specifically. So this is a nice kind of framework or example of what the previous slide outlined for teaching the target word impress. So I'm just going to give you a minute to read through that lesson. I'm not going to read it aloud to you. I'll read the second part because it's smaller. I couldn't fit it on the slide, but read through that steps 1 through 5. You'll get a taste for what that instruction looks like. Okay, just a few more seconds for your read, and then I'll talk through this a little bit. Okay, so in the first step of teaching the word impress, the teacher revisits the context that the word impress occurred in the story. And that's an important first step to do because it sets them, it sets the context for how it's used in that particular instance. And then step 2 is providing that student-friendly definition, and then connected back to the story that the word was used in. And then step 3 is you say the word out loud, right? You're developing a phonological representation of the word when you do that. So it's building those kind of that opportunity to make that connection. When you see the word in print, you have that phonological representation and you can decode it better. And so then there are some different contexts that are brought forth in the examples that you see here after they say the word. And so that's good because you show the context in the story, but then you're also giving them other contexts that the word can be used in. And that gives them kind of the impetus to start thinking about something that would impress them. And they talk about that use that in a sentence. And she gives them a little sentence frame. I would be impressed if, and then you finish the sentence. And then repeats the word again. And then there's some more opportunities at on the right side of the slide to kind of think about when you've taught all 3 words. Usually in this text talk lesson plan, there's 3 target words that you pull out for that particular day's reading. So then you kind of contrast with the other words. So here's the first example. I'll read it aloud since it's kind of small. If your sister gave you your favorite grape flavored popsicle, would you vanish or be impressed? Why or why not? Right. So then they have to use the word and think about which word it applies to that context, and then explain why that is. So you're developing oral language, you're giving them another context for them to use the word in. And if you think about it, how many opportunities are they using the word impressed, right? And just in this lesson here, they're listening to it in some different contexts. They're practicing using that on their own, using it in a sentence and discussing it. And then they're actually comparing it and contrasting it with other words that they're doing in still more different contexts. So already they're working towards their 12 interactions that they need. I'll just do one more example. Your favorite TV show comes on while you're doing your homework. Do you get distracted or vanish? Which one? I think those are cute. So next slide, I'm going to share with you some other examples of the ways you can do some more active engagement with words in the Teacher Reading Sourcebook. This is a chart from there on page 430. I'll just give you a couple seconds to read through those examples of the types of active engagement you can do, similar to what I was just reading aloud to you. In this case, it's the target word is interior. Okay, I think maybe go to the next slide. And this is what I was going to end with, but just to reiterate what I said before, that a couple of things that I said is that in early elementary, kindergarten, first grade in particular, you want to think about 2 strands, a word recognition strand, and then a language comprehension strand, where you're using high level read alouds that are both literary and informational text to help develop background knowledge and vocabulary knowledge. Again, vocabulary knowledge and background knowledge are inextricably linked, and they form the foundation for verbal reasoning skills, in particular with inferencing. And I think that's the last of what, oh, I know we're going to do again, the idea of which strategy for success that Linsday lists on page 134 through 150, will you definitely start incorporating into your practice? And again, why this one, and what about that particular strategy resonated with you that made you want to try that first or next? So feel free to come off mute and share that, or share it in the chat. Either way. Oh, and Cynthia, I love what you said about the Utah text talk lessons. There's like 100 of them in there. They're great. A lot of great examples, and you can create your own from so many examples that they provide. And Cheryl, I just want to correct you one. Oh, go ahead, Cynthia. No, go ahead, Cynthia.
They've really been good. I mean, it was a big undertaking, but we've really enjoyed using them. And we've got a new reading series this year, our state adopted and our district adopted. So they're finding less time to do them. So I've started doing them in the library and made a wall with the words that we've put up. That we've gone over. That way we, kind of keep them fresh in our head like that. But we really enjoyed them last year. I hate that this new reading series is kind of, put an end to it, because the lessons really are good. We use them in our summer literacy camp as well.
That's great. Well, thanks for sharing that. Just Cheryl, quick correction to what you wrote in the chat about the source book. The spelling chapters and the wide reading were taken away from the first edition, so they're not in the third edition.
Sorry, I was trying to type what you were saying.
No worries.
I'm glad you clarified. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, but there is the updates in the research citations and an MTSS chapter at the end of the third edition.
Thanks, Dale.
Yep. The vocabulary skits.
Ainsley was saying she likes the vocabulary skits on page 144. Kids like those too. So that's really great. Change it up a bit.
Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Carrie says she's going to look more into those text talks. She needs to be intentional of adding more informational text in kindergarten. It's true. I have a 4-year-old granddaughter, and I just read her a book about magnets, and she was like riveted. She was really excited about these magnets.
I loved Lindsay's discussion of reading with her son about, was it dinosaurs? No. What was it about? I can't remember now what it was, but
like the black hole or something.
Yes,
really.
that's right. It's about black holes.
Yeah.
Thanks. I don't know why I got dinosaurs. How she was struggling with some of the concepts because she didn't really have much background information about it. And he knew a lot, and so he was able to really read more fluently than she was. Interesting.
What a great experience to kind of flip it with your mom, though, right? Like he knew more than she did. That's a great self-esteem builder as well. That said, she wants to try the 3-column notes on page 143. That is a very good strategy. I have used that. Kiddos love the nonfiction. Oh, kindergarten kiddos love the nonfiction. I agree. They're naturally inquisitive and they do great thinking alongside the text. Yeah, they're not intimidated. They're just free flowing with their information. But
I think a point that Dale made earlier that I think is so important is that often the little ones didn't get informational text because they couldn't read it themselves. And so we have to keep in our minds that we're about teaching them to read and also reading to them for other reasons. And those are compatible, essential partnership in terms of what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think it was common practice for us to read stories that were a couple grade levels ahead, but maybe not informational text.
I agree.
That was a couple grade levels ahead.
Well, with informational text, you could almost get away with that it doesn't always have to be 2 grade levels ahead. It could be on grade level or a grade level above. It can be
above, right?
Because the concepts are more abstract, the vocabulary very more tier 3 like, they're not
experiential for the kids.
Exactly.
Right.
That's great. Good information. Thank you.
Okay. Well, so how about if we move on and we can always backtrack a little bit more? So couple comments, developing vocabulary, knowing includes knowing the meanings of the words the learners can decode. And again, one of the reasons in Sortagories that we dedicate an entire row of our activities to vocabulary, antonyms and synonyms and examples with related, semantic categorization, classification with categorize it, and relationship of words with analogy building, is that and I don't minimize this, going from print to speech accurately and automatically is not a complete knowledge of the word. And that's why we want to take those words to that next level with vocabulary-oriented activities. And this, I think, was really huge. Good readers make meaning by reading in phrases. Struggling readers, this is going to jump ahead again. Struggling readers limit meaning by reading word by word. And I think that's a really important point for us to distinguish, is that when someone's reading by phrases, they are comprehending, and that's a big thing. But not everybody does that. Not all students do that intuitively. So one of the things we've done in Sortagories is to teach kids how to understand what a group of words is actually telling us and why those words go together. And this example of the question where tells us a place. So when words go together to answer where, like in the grass, we should read that as a group of words, not as in the grass, as unrelated. So I think teaching students to get to that is part of what we're about with Sortagories. And we have several activities. In level A, we build to this skill using phrase building. And then in level B, we take the same idea of reading or indicating to students, let me go back this little, indicating where the phrases are, the words or phrases are, and then ask students to identify what are those, is that group telling us, to really have kids begin to internalize the relationship between the questions that words or groups of words answer, and how to read with greater understanding. I think expression is lovely, but if you can understand it, I think that would trump expression. So in level B, we work on that, and then I wanted to keep going here to say, I thought this was a really important activity. I love this activity on page 149, where it's like the newspaper who, what, when, where questions. In Sortagories, we start working on that with our activity grammar sort, where we have students sort words or phrases according to the question that they answer. And if you keep practicing that, we really encourage kids to internalize the question and how words actually answer those. And then we carry that forward, as I said a moment ago, with the phrase building and sentence fluency activities, by giving them those kinds of explanations, as I showed you with where. I love this activity. And in fact, this activity of paragraph shrinking was how I first came to know Linsday. She did a presentation for the Reading Science Academy, Stephanie Stoller's Reading Science Academy. And what Linsday was telling us is that she saw fantastic change or improvement in her students' fluency by doing this activity. And so first of all, I really wanted to encourage people to read that part of the chapter carefully, because she saw tremendous improvement with the paired reading paragraph shrinking routine. But what really caught my attention as well is that the very first question kids ask each other after they read is, name the most important who or what the article or that they've read, or the paragraph is about. And I think that is so important because that again goes back to what role are words playing. But there, as Cheryl and I were working on sentence fluency, we were saying, but there's something we have to understand when we read beyond the first sentence or so, is that we don't keep saying that same who or what over and over and over. So what we've tried to do in Sortagories is to illustrate and to help kids learn that there are three ways that we talk about the who or what. When you go beyond the first mention of it, we can either repeat it like whales and whales, we can replace it using a pronoun, or we can use a synonym, a word or a phrase that is another way to say the same thing. I would like to think that that this activity pairs beautifully with that first step of paragraph shrinking, because it helps students to track that reference throughout a paragraph. That is how we talk about the same thing without using the same words again and again. And because Tamika Reese is in the audience tonight, I want to put in a plug that for the ReadWork article sets, because Lindsay used those for this paragraph shrinking. So if you're not familiar with ReadWorks, hurry on over and check that website out. It's all free material, which makes it even more amazing. And then students must have multiple opportunities to practice to improve their fluency. And, I go back to, we've seen this each session because this is really what we are trying to do in Sortagories, which is to say, just because these are little decodable words doesn't mean we shouldn't do all of these different activities with them and basically why? To provide practice opportunities. And by doing that, we are also tackling both parts of the rope. We also include this. This is from Lindsay's book, and this is from our website, that we are simultaneously working on breaking the code as well as building language comprehension. So we will end up with students who read with comprehension. And that is why we say with Sortagories that we go from sound to syntax, that it is going beyond the code to getting to meaning, and syntax is a big part of that. And with that, we have come to the end of our Mighty Move Mondays, but we aren't finished with our conversation. If people have questions or comments, I do want to go on so that you can take advantage of the free trial if you are interested of Sortagories. And Cheryl, you want to keep going from here? I'm sorry, I kept just babbling.
Yep. Will you just go back one slide?
Of course, I will.
Just real quick. So to go back one slide, I just want to say that if you're just joining us, I know we have some new people with us. You might be listening to this recording before others. All of the other recordings will be in the show notes from this last one. It will be cumulative, so you can get all of the recordings. They're also on our YouTube channel. The show notes are a little better because if there's things added, like Dale's sample for the core book, that will be in there. We'll put some things in the notes that were mentioned in the conversation that were not in the book. So I just want you to know there is a cumulative way of getting the recordings and the show notes. Okay, and now the next slide. These QR codes or sortagories.com /free-trial. You just, where did you get, the code from? You just can say 7 Mighty Moves, and then there's a link to order 7 Mighty Moves. You could also get it from the Reading League, Reading League website as well. So there's different places now that you can get that book, and it is a bestseller on Amazon under a couple different categories. So I think we are officially Lindsay's biggest cheerleaders. She has so many, it's probably not true, but we feel like we are. Okay, next slide. Nancy, well, I want to talk about the one on the right and then have Nancy pick up on the left. So on the right is another book club, and I kind of feel like we're the warm-up band for this book club. We started this book club and then heard about the one here from the Reading League, a couple different state chapters. So that's starting October 18th, and they're going to take it a little slower. Each move has its own month, and it's spread out over time. So I do encourage you to consider that book club for just another dose of the same conversation. And then Nancy, what's going on in Connecticut?
Well, before we got started with this whole Mighty Moves Monday, we, the Connecticut chapter of the Reading League, invited Linsday to come to an in-person event. So if you are around the state of Connecticut, and we are a little state, this would not work in Dale's state of California, or that's not where you are now, but I know you used to be there. But anyone is welcome. It's going to be at the Barack Obama University School on the campus of Southern Connecticut State University. It's an opportunity to hear Linsday in person, and then we've convened several people from the state and different roles within the state to talk about how they're trying to make the shifts that Linsday has talked about, the moves that she's talked about. So please join us. It's free. We are going to have refreshments and an opportunity to buy the book and have the book signed, because Linsday will be there. So we'd love to see you show up.
That's so awesome. If I was closer, I would be there.
I know. But there are a lot of states that are close. We have Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey, all drivable. And you could stay for lunch in New Haven. Okay, enough about that.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for being here. Our contact information is on the screen. We're really proud as Sortagories to be mentioned in so many places like UFly. They've mentioned us in their decodable text guide. We're in Reading Rockets. We're on social media. We were recently added to the Alaska approved list and awaiting clarification on another state that we'll be sharing as soon as we get official announcement for. So we just want to thank you for being here through all the moves, even if you've just caught a couple. Some of you are catching recordings. And I know Linsday couldn't be with us on this particular session. She did hop on with us the 2 sessions ago. I can't remember now, the first and the middle way. But we want to thank her for partnering with us. She was really excited for us to do this book club and share some Sortagories examples. And we just really want to thank her as well for such a terrific book and an opportunity to talk with her about it.
And I'd like to ask this group if they wouldn't mind, if you can, unmuting and coming live, because next Monday, which we won't be together for another Mighty Monday, happens to be a very special day for Cheryl. It's her birthday. So could we just take a moment to capture on recording singing happy birthday to Cheryl?
Oh my goodness.
Could we just do that? Because it's a big birthday, just saying, and we want to not miss
I'm going to turn 12.
She's going to turn 12. So anybody willing to sing, let's go. Happy birthday. You have to unmute.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Cheryl. Happy birthday to you.
Well, thank you. I think that might be my first Zoom birthday song. I'm not sure. That might be my first experience. So thank you very much. I do want to just say one more thing, that we will be at the Reading League and at IDA. So if you are at either of those conferences, they are fabulous. As you know, please stop by and see us at our booth. Dale, once again, thank you for being with us. I have enjoyed getting to know you over the years. And Nancy, I like Dale, I've known her for decades. So such a pleasure to work with both of you. And I want to thank everyone for being here. We're going to stop the recording, but if you want to unmute yourself and have any other comments, or sing to me again, we could do that, whatever you prefer. So, but thank you for being here. It's just been such a pleasure.
It was my pleasure too to be here. Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you, Nancy, for inviting me, and thank you all for attending, and hope you learned something new.
I'm sure they did. It was a really good presentation and lots of things to think about.